Hi, I'm John DeVore. Welcome to the DeVore Fidelity YouTube channel. Today's going to be a record review, or rather I'm going to review through a bunch of records with a common theme. The theme I wanted to talk about today is the Silver Linings theme, or making lemonade out of lemons, which I think is kind of an appropriate theme for these days. My lemonade from lemons currently is this YouTube channel, which would not have started if it wasn't for the COVID shutdown. I've also sort of gotten back into drawing to some extent, and I know a lot of people have started creative projects and things like that during these times. It's a great thing. It's a great way to make a positive come out of a big negative. So the first record I wanted to talk about in that vein is one of the most famous ones. This is Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here. The story behind this album, this came out in the mid-70s. Pink Floyd started about a decade before and was founded by a guy named Syd Barrett and a bunch of his friends from school. And they were quite successful, and Syd Barrett was the creative force behind that early version of Pink Floyd. But he had a number of mental health issues and finally had to leave the band in 1969. At that point, another one of his friends, David Gilmour, was brought in, and Gilmour, along with primarily Roger Waters, stepped in to fill that creative void that was left when Syd took off. They made a couple of albums and were quite successful, including their number one album of all time, Dark Side of the Moon. And immediately following the Dark Side of the Moon album release and the grueling tour that came after that, the band found themselves really sort of mentally and physically exhausted and kind of out of ideas. Roger Waters eventually came up with an idea for another concept album. Threaded through it was a lot of discussion about mental illness, of the pressures that the record industry puts on artists, and those themes ended up becoming this record. And there's a suite of songs in here called Shine On You Crazy Diamond, and that is a pretty direct homage to Syd Barrett. And the legend goes that when they were working on an early mix of Shine On You Crazy Diamond, Syd Barrett came to visit them in the studio, and he was so changed physically and mentally that the band members didn't even recognize him, and it took them quite a while to realize who it was. And it was a very sad moment for the band and for these friends, who were also friends of Syd Barrett's, and it made what is, in my opinion, Pink Floyd's greatest record. It's a pretty spectacular glass of lemonade made from the lemons of mental health problems. The next couple of albums have been inspired by infidelity. With this album, this is Frank Sinatra's In the Wee Small Hours. This one was Frank's infidelity. He was, just before he made this album, married to Ava Gardner, who was an incredibly glamorous movie star of the time. And he couldn't keep it in his pants. So Ava Gardner dumped him. And a few years before, Columbia Records also dumped him. It was kind of a transformative time in his life. He was really depressed. He was down in the dumps. The whole first phase of his career, the young heartthrob phase of his career, was over. Capitol Records signed him, and he put out a few albums that were not that different from the original Columbia stuff. And then he did this one, which was a much more inward-gazing, intense feeling, and Sinatra referred to it himself as the Ava album. The next one, also inspired by infidelity, is a masterpiece, true masterpiece. This is Beyonce's Lemonade. In Beyonce's case, she was not unfaithful. It was her husband, Jay-Z. And the fruit that infidelity bore, aside from a lot of therapy sessions, was this masterpiece. This is Beyonce's greatest album. It's a massive double album that is also multimedia. It comes with a book. There was a very long form video that was done with this. It's a beautiful package with gorgeous artwork and beautiful yellow vinyl, if you manage to snag a copy of the vinyl. But most importantly, it is a multi-genre masterpiece. She is a towering talent. Beyonce is an incredible musician, and she has a huge number of amazing hits and amazing albums. But this one has a soberness and a scope that none of the other records even come close to. And in fact, most other records, period, don't come close to. Instead of making what you might expect, a finger-wagging, shame on you, I'm too good for this type of record in response to infidelity by a husband, she stepped up and broadened the scope so much so that it's more than I can talk about in this video. But this is a fantastic album. Very good sounding, awesome music, and a testament to a true genius. The next record on this list, it was written in what could be considered among the very worst situations any human can face. This is Olivier Messian's Quartet for the End of Time, and it was actually written in a Nazi stalag, or a Nazi prison camp. Messian was captured by the Nazis when they invaded France, and he was brought to a prison camp that was essentially a way station on the way to the concentration camps. At the camp, he met a number of other musicians and ended up writing a quartet for the musicians that were in the camp. So this is written for piano, clarinet, violin, and cello. His inspiration, unsurprisingly, was this idea from the Bible of an angel heralding the end of times. The piece itself is incredible. There are several solos in here. There's a beautiful clarinet solo, and there's a cello solo in here that is among my favorite pieces of music. Highly recommended. This is my favorite version. There are a lot of versions out there, and many of them are really quite excellent. But the EMI is my favorite of the ones that I've heard. And the last two I wanted to talk about are masterpieces of music that were written by incredible artists that knew they were dying. The first one is Franz Schubert, Winterreise. It was written when Franz Schubert was dying of syphilis, and it essentially defines what a classical song cycle can be. It was originally written for tenor and piano, and the piano is not really so much of an accompanist as it is more of a duet. The piano part is a very important part of the piece itself. It is most famously sung by a baritone, by this baritone. This is Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau. And his most famous collaborator here is Gerald Moore. Gerald Moore actually came out of retirement to do this piece. While there are a number of performances by these two, this one is probably my favorite. It's the last one that they did together on Deutsche Grammophon. It's a very moving piece of music. And the last one I wanted to talk about, and this is certainly not a complete list, but the last one is Bowie's Blackstar. It's said that when Bowie was diagnosed and he knew that he wasn't going to make it, he wanted to make one final album, and this album stands in contrast to all of his other work. There's a lot more elements of jazz in here. He got musicians together that he didn't normally work with and just made this incredible dark masterpiece from a true genius who is still sorely missed to this day. I hope you've been able to make some good out of this really hard time, and I really appreciate you joining me on my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you at the next video. Bye.